Hi, good morning. I'm Rabbi Ira Eben with Rabbi Howie Goldsmith, and we're returning for our second episode of Sacred Texts Left to Right. I'm here in my home with my son's basketball hoop in the background, so if we get bored, we can take some shoots and hoops in the middle. And Rabbi Goldsmith is in his office. I am, just a reminder, I'm the Rabbi of Congregation of Shalom in Merrick, Long Island, and here is Rabbi Goldsmith.
Hi, I am Rabbi Howard Goldsmith from Congregation Emmanuel of Westchester in Rye, New York. And Ira, it's a pleasure to be with you again. I wish I had a basketball hoop here with me, but we'll have to use yours if need be. So this week we chose a pretty challenging text, and it's based on something that bothers me. Always when I read the Akedah and I read about God testing Abraham, I want to understand, what is the test? Why is there a test? Does Abraham pass the test? This test gets into my head and won't leave me alone. And so instead of going off by myself, I decided to dig in a little bit where the rabbis are. And needless to say, there's a lot about testing Abraham, but this is one perspective. So why don't I share the text now, and then we can start the discussion. Does that work for you? Okay, so I'm going to put the text up on the screen. Rather. Later, if you want to look at the text again, it'll be in the comments just below on this YouTube. Okay, so here is our text.
Nice.
For Midrash Tanchuma, a collection of rabbinic wisdom on Vayera, that's the Torah portion, chapter 21, verse 1. And the verse says, and God did prove Abraham. So prove, you can either also translate as test. And the rabbis say, observe this difference between the earlier generations and the later generations. The earlier generations were tested by the Holy One, blessed be He. As it is said, and God did prove or test Abraham. In Scripture elsewhere states, regarding the generation of the desert, that He might afflict thee to prove thee, to know what was in thy heart. The later generations were tested by the nations of the world. For it is said, now these are the nations which the Lord left to prove Israel, to test Israel by them, from the book of Judges. So this is our text. The Hebrew's over here, and like I said, the Hebrew and the English will be just below here in the comment section if you'd like to refer to it later. Okay, I stopped the share.
We're back.
Now we're back.
Okay.
So, Ira, why don't you lay out the issues that the text raises for us, and then we can get into it a little bit.
So, Howie, you chose a very challenging, theologically challenging text. So, thank you for that. Mine was much brighter, by the way, if I told you last week. The text deals with what we call a nisayon, with the challenges, and where does challenges come from? Do challenges come from God, or do they come from other sources, from man-made sources? How we address them, and how do we respond to them? But these are big questions, and maybe I'll just hear your thoughts as well.
Absolutely. So, as a Reformed Jew coming at this from a Reform and fairly liberal perspective, I want to lay out on the table immediately that I consider myself what's called a limited theist. So I believe in a God that is all good, benevolent, and loving, but not all powerful. And so I believe in a God that can't catch an airplane falling out of the sky, and that cannot cure cancer when God wants, that the world works the way it works. And God essentially can't really interfere in the natural order of things. Now, that being said, the God that I believe in is a loving and benevolent God, so that when we suffer, God is there with us. We are never alone when we suffer. And when we celebrate, God is there with us to heighten our joys. That feeling of never being alone, the feeling of knowing that we're always in the company of a divine presence that wants what's best for us and that inspires us to do the best that we can in our world, is a deeply meaningful notion of God for me. So I think it's important to lay that out there in the beginning. Now, that being said, when I go in to pray, when I go in for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, when I am sitting in a hospital room with a patient, rather with a congregant or a friend or family member, I suspend my disbelief. And it's at moments like that when I really need to dig in and to say, God, I hope that you are there and can do something about this, because if this is from you, then I want you to address this. That helps to buoy my spirit. It motivates me to do everything that I can to address a situation. And so this text really, really pulls that out for me. It sets it in sharp relief. Is this something that comes from God? Is this something that we need to pray to God for, to come together as a community with God? Or is this something from nature? And the best that we can do is address it in human ways.
So Howie, I have a completely different perspective, which is fine, which is why we're here. As an Orthodox rabbi and a more conservative with a lowercase c, I have a different perspective on how God runs the world. There are different opinions. There are opinions that God runs everything, that no leaf falls from a tree without it being guided by God and landing on the ground. There are other perspectives, and I want to share the ones that I relate to the most, and that speaks to me. Nobody ever asked God, or actually they've asked and nobody got an answer. So we don't really know. When Moses says, show me your ways, and God says, no, you can't. I can't show you how it is. So we really just speculate. The way I understand is that there are things that God runs the world. God is all powerful. And with God being all powerful, basically everything happens through him. However, there are times that we refer to as hester panim, where God hides his face, where God retracts and allows nature to take its course. So if an earthquake takes place, or a tsunami, and it's based on plate tectonics, and did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, you got that right.
and if ever, so that is God allowing the world to function on its normal way. God doesn't intervene. God didn't get involved. If a terrible tragedy takes place, like the one we had yesterday in Texas, that is God allowing man to do something, to be on their own and not getting involved, hiding his face. It would have been, if the man got a flat tire on the way over to the church yesterday, so then we know or we can feel that's God's hand, but he didn't get involved, and so that is basically how the world is run. Sometimes God gets involved, sometimes God doesn't get involved. And when I sit at a patient's or a congregant's bedside, or going through difficult times, and I say, Imo anochi betzara, that God is with me in my challenges, I'm asking God, I need you to get involved now. I know you can. I believe with you in a perfect faith, and I need you to do something, whether it be a miracle or do it through natural causes. So this text is a little different. This text, I think, is saying, if Abraham was lucky enough to hear God's voice directly and say, Elokim nisat Avram, I'm here to test you. We in the later generations don't have that voice. And so God's testing us by not getting personally involved. And so it's our challenge to be able to see him in our response.
Well, that's interesting. So the test that we have, when we're tested, it's that God is not involved rather than that God is involved. So it's not that God causes the challenge, but the challenge is that God isn't addressing whatever's coming up.
Well, no, I think there's one of the two. In other words, in Abraham's case, he saw God bring the challenge.
Right.
In our case, or without miracles and without prophecy, so then it's we don't see it directly, but somehow either he brought it or he allowed it to happen. There's this thing around here that happened about 5 years ago. We don't like this call. It's called Sandy, and when the floods came and invaded our basements and our homes and destroyed everything in its sight, I said it's one of two things. If you weren't affected, either God decided that you shouldn't be affected, or God got involved. What did I say? If one of the two, either it was destined that you weren't supposed to be, and God got involved, or he made sure that the waters did not touch you. In other words, one of the two. And that people should be thankful and respond, and therefore be benevolent and generous to the people that were affected.
Right.
There is a follow-up to that effect, but it's important that even during challenges to recognize that these challenges do come from God, whether they're divine by his hand or divine by man's hand or by natural cause.
Right. It's interesting. First, I want to acknowledge that to a large extent, I'm very jealous of the kind of faith that you're describing. I wish that I had that sense of faith and that confidence. because I can imagine that being even more meaningful, that whenever there's a challenge, to understand that one way or another, God is involved in that challenge. I think that could lend great meaning for me. I can't get there. I wish I could, but I'm not there. But there was something else that you said at one point that really struck me. You talked about us speculating about whether God is causing this challenge, or this challenge is happening because of man and God chooses not to get involved, and that we can't know, that there's a bit of speculation there. And I call that mystery. I always, when congregants or other people come to me and say they're not sure what they believe about God, how, they don't know that they can really describe their belief in God, or some version of that challenge, I always turn back to mystery and say, God is too grand and too big for us to fully understand, and that giving into that mystery, that inability for us to know exactly how the role that God plays in our world, is actually a source of comfort for me. To recognize that we can't possibly know, and that's okay, because a lot of life is mysterious. And so to have from my perspective, a benevolent divine force that is wrapped up in that mystery is actually quite comforting. So I like that you brought up that speculation and that mystery.
So I see it a little bit different and a little bit the same, right?
Okay.
So I see, obviously, the mystery is that we cannot understand God,
Right.
But I see it more of challenge. In Psalm 23, we say, "Gam ki elech b'geit tzalmavet lo irara ki ata imadi." Even though I walk in the valley of darkness, I'm not afraid because I know you're with me, right?
Right.
You're in darkness, you don't see God. You don't know where he is, but you know he's still there.
Right.
And that's really the challenge. That Abraham, the reality is, and the truth is that Abraham's test, as crazy and difficult as it was, he did hear it from the voice of God, right? He did get it directly, and he's heard this voice before, or at least he believes so. So therefore, it's less of a challenge. My challenge, I believe, and the challenge of man today, is to say, when something happens, is God still there? Is he involved? And the test is that we get is to be able to see God still, even when his face is not apparent.
Right.
So it's less of a mystery; it's more of a challenge. And ultimately, it's the true test will say, will I feel as though God is still with me and God is bringing these challenges, even though it's not so apparent?
So I've been holding back from bringing up reaction to the challenges, because, as you pointed out, that's kind of where I go from this text rather than inherent to the text. But I can't help it, because whenever I read text, I want to know, okay, but now what? Like, where does this take me? And so two things. First of all, I'm always troubled by God's test of Abraham, because when God announces to Abraham that God's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham argues vociferously to the point of being somewhat annoying. But when God, on behalf of a population of people that he, maybe he knows, but he doesn't have a deep investment in, maybe his nephew, but he could have, sent you a text message and said, "Hey, Lot, get out of there."
Not only that, they're anti-everything he stands for.
Anti-everything. And he argues again and again, do not do this, do not kill them. And then God announces that Abraham needs to sacrifice his son, and not a word, no argument. So this always really, it really troubles me. And I say, if we're trying to find God in the test, I don't understand why Abraham wouldn't in that moment argue just like he did for Sodom. And so what this test says to me is, what kind of reaction are we going to have to the test that we face? And really, I don't think it's one or the other. And this is different than what we said before we got on the video today. I don't think it's either we react like this is from God, or we react like this is from nature, from humans, from the nations of the world. I think we always react like it's both. I think we always need to turn to God for support in the challenges that we face. And at the same time, we are obliged to act as if it's from nature, as if it's from the nations of the world, and we need to do what we can to help solve the challenge, to help address the need. And I think that the case in Texas is perfect. I mean, for talking about this, it's horrible, and it's perfect for talking about this, because on the one hand, we do want to send thoughts and prayers to those people who've suffered, and we need to reflect and consider how God can support us in this horrendous tragedy. And at the same time, we need to wonder, what responsibility do we have that this has happened? And what steps can we take to help prevent things like this in the future?
So I just want to reiterate what you said about how horrible it is to know what's happening yesterday in the place of worship, and how painful this was, especially for religious leaders like ourselves. I want to go back to the text, and what you're saying, though, is that I'm not sure the response is necessarily action. And I know we spoke about before that you think that Abraham might have failed this test because he doesn't respond. So I heard a great talk this past Saturday morning, special Shabbat morning, by Rabbi Ira Eben. That was me, and that was my sermon. So I'm not going to give the sermon over again. I talked about the same question that you're asking now, and I think the distinction, just one point, the distinction is that this was Abraham's personal challenge. Over there in Sodom, it was his challenge to defend mankind as Av Hamun Gayim, and his new title as the Father among Nations. But here, when he's asked a question or a challenge to himself, for a personal challenge, it really was about sacrifice and saying, God, I hear you. This is what you're asking me to do. It's the most painful, challenging thing that I've ever done in my entire life and I could ever imagine. And my challenge here is to say, who am I? Where is my allegiance? Twice we see the words Hineni, 3 times actually. He's first with God and then with his son. He wrestles with this. But it's ultimately his challenge to be able to say that you are the one who provides me with everything. And even though you promised me a legacy, whatever you're asking me to do right now, Hineni, here I am. And the challenge really is to be able to see God throughout this whole process. And through that challenge, there's a spiritual level that cannot be attained anywhere else. Through any challenge and stress and difficulty, that's where Abraham rises to the occasion, because it was so difficult and challenging. And sometimes when we deal with tests and challenges, it's about growth, and it's about how we rise to every I don't want to say occasion, but every challenge, we come out stronger than we were before. Just a different experience.
So, first of all, it's a beautiful sermon. I'm glad you got to use it again.
More. You missed the joke, but that was
okay. Next time. I don't believe that there are any personal challenges that don't also impact the people we love and the world around us. And so I feel that the personal challenges that we face need to be addressed not only on the spiritual level that you're talking about, although that's deeply meaningful and important. And there can be incredible spiritual and also physical benefit from dealing with and going through challenges. I also think that we need to constantly be asking, who else does this impact? And how can I use this test to better my relationships and better the world around me? Not only to ask, what is the impact on me and my relationship with God? And I'm not sure that disagrees with what you're saying.
I don't think it disagrees. I think actually it's a response. What have I grown from this? Therefore, how do I share this? How do I share this experience? You have a survivor of cancer and someone's been through these challenges. They can go and share this and give encouragement to the people who are going through these challenges.
Right.
They have that godly ability. Henry, I know our time is running out, but I want to tell a quick parable, and then, because I get the last word, and then, and maybe it'll help, excuse me, maybe it'll help share this perspective. There's a great story about a guy, very eccentric, wealthy man who I shared this in Rosh Hashanah a couple of years ago, an eccentric, wealthy man who has a huge party and fills his gigantic Olympic-sized pool with sharks. You know the story?
No.
He says that anybody who's brave enough to swim from one side to the other side with this pool full of sharks, I'll give them whatever they want. I'll give them anything they ask for. And so everybody's murmuring, nobody knows what to do. This guy's a little nuts. He's like, whatever. All of a sudden you hear splash. And you turn around and you see this guy, and he's swimming and swimming. He's going across. Sharks are about to bite him. And he finally gets all the way across, and he's shaking like crazy. And this rich man comes over to him and he says, "Sir, you are the bravest man I have ever met in my entire life. Tell me. I'll give you anything you want. Tell me what you asked for. And he says, I only asked for one thing. I want the name of the guy who pushed me in the pool. And the parable is that I believe God pushed us in the pool. One way or another, allowed us to fall or allowed us to get pushed or pushed us indirectly. And the goal and the challenge is to get past at the end of the pool, to live through this experience, to grow from it, and know that this is how God is looking as a parent for us to grow from every experience.
Mm. It's a beautiful story, and I think my question is, why did nobody pull him out?
Because they were sharp.
Right. You know, but where was everybody else standing there looking on? And I think we need to be asking ourselves both things all the time. You know, why am I being tested is less important than what can I learn from this test and how can I share that growth. And at the same time, when we see others being tested, how can we be there for them morally and spiritually? And also, what can we do in this world now to help with those tests?
Okay. I think we'll agree on that. No, yeah. I think we do agree on that.
I think we do.
I'm not sure how we got to that agreement. I think we came from different sides.
Right.
We definitely agree to it.
It's nice to end a session on agreement.
There you go.
There you go. Okay, wonderful. Ira, this was a pleasure.
Always fun, Howie. We'll see you next week.
Okay, great.